Well, Brady, thanks so much for being on the show today. Looking forward to this conversation and talking through what you're doing and the kind of the unique work you're doing in this space. A lot of people, if they're familiar with Pro Church tools, if not, they can find it. I know you've shared your story a lot of places, so maybe just like a kind of a Cliff Note version, so we can get in the conversation. What's your story behind Pro Church tools and what it is?
Yeah, so Pro Church Tools is a company, we'd like to say, helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift of all time. So we help churches with everything in the creative sphere. In terms of how I arrived at starting this company, we're about 10 years old now. I went to Bible college to be a youth pastor, really wanted to pursue ministry in that way. Couple years into studying, kind of realized I didn't have the relational bandwidth to be a full-time pastor, especially with students. You know, I loved it, but I would come home and I would just feel exhausted. And I was kind of projecting, forecasting like, a career in this for many, many years. I think I don't have what it takes. What I did love, though, was working with churches exclusively. And so I started this media internship at a new church plant. And pastor put a camera in my hand, and I just fell in love with taking the message of Jesus and intersecting it with creative fields. And as I was learning these skills, I began like publishing what I was learning on YouTube and on a blog and on a podcast. And because this was, early 2010s, that wasn't something that was especially popular at the time, but there were a few churches doing it. And so they would kind of like track down my content and they would join my email list, and slowly things grew from there. And today, we have a team of close to 30. And like I said, been in business for 10 years, got a location in Canada where I live, and half the team's located, another location in the States, and then a number of remote employees as well.
So, Pro Church Tools, it works with churches. I don't know. I guess it's somewhat kind of unique. Maybe it's not. It's a for-profit business in a nonprofit world. Can you maybe just talk through maybe some of the challenges, maybe some of the pushback I think you might get from people who are like, hey, this business is like, you're making money. Churches aren't supposed to make money. Like, how does that work for you?
Well, at least for us, we serve churches in the free space more than any other space. So, you can go to our YouTube channel and find 500 plus videos. Go to our podcast, find 750 plus podcasts. And that's where we equip churches and empower them. We create all types of free digital downloads and training resources to help churches learn to do things themselves, because that's how I learned when I was the media director at my church. And then if a church wants to take the next step and say, you know what, can you just do it for us? Well, that's when they would be welcome to, pursue any one of our products. So we have a website builder software. We do social media agency work directly with churches. So, let's say, I think my Instagram had like 833,000 views last month. So like, we don't have 833,000 customers. We might have, 1% of the customers that we have, interactions on social each week or each month. So we try to lead with free. And then if churches want to go beyond that, then they're welcome to work with us.
Yeah. To the extent you're comfortable sharing, just to give people like handles on the kind of maybe the scope of your business, how many churches, or kind of what is like how big is Pro Church Tools today? What does that look like?
Yeah, so our yearly operating budget is north of $5 million. We have, I think 30 employees in and around there. And then we have about 3,000 churches on our software platform, Nucleus. And then Social Sermons, which is our social media agency, we restrict that to about 150 churches. Reason being for that is that agency work, you have to scale the people with the churches. And there's kind of just a rough number of 150 that we kind of like feel comfortable serving beyond expanding our team. And we're not quite ready to do that, at least in that specific product.
Yeah. Now, I heard a little bit about this. I don't know, when you started Pro Church Tools, I'm guessing like a $5 million budget, home base, not just in Canada now in the United States, like this big thing. Probably not what you envisioned. I'm curious, like in the software space, funding's a big thing. And I know you guys have taken a kind of unique approach in terms of like not raising outside funds, that sort of thing. How much of that was intentional versus it kind of happened over time? Was that always been kind of your conviction? What's that been like?
Yeah, at the beginning of the business, all I wanted to do was replace the $1,200 per month income I had from church. My wife was working full-time in insurance, and then in the evenings at retail at the local mall. And we were newly married when I was starting the blog. It wasn't even a company for the first 2 years. We've been incorporated officially for 11 years this May, but there was 2 years before that where it was just, sole proprietor, because I didn't envision it becoming an official business. It was just a side hustle. And so quickly within that first year, we had replaced my income. And so from the very beginning, it was profitable. So there was never this idea in my mind that to build something, you needed like an influx of capital from outside sources. And then when we got to the software, which was, 8 years into like the company's existence, we had banked about like $1 million that was in the savings account that we were kind of like, okay, like we're just kind of doing educational resources and training. Like, what if something happens in the world like that makes that type of business inflexible or vulnerable? And then also I'm in my 20s. I'm like, what we want to build something special. Let's take a swing, like a big swing. And that was where the idea for Nucleus, our church website builder, came from. The thing is, it was profitable from the very beginning as well, because when we launched, because we had this audience that we had been building for 8 years, 1,000 churches signed up to pay in the first week. And so we spent the $1 million kind of building the first iteration of it, and then we were profitable from day one there. And what that has given us is tremendous control over the decisions that we make, in the sense that what our churches want is what we build, rather than this is what's most profitable for the business, and this is what the board of directors is wanting to do. Yeah. And so that's kind of where we are with profit and funding. When you're profitable from day one, you never feel the need, I guess, to go into debt.
Yeah. Have people approached you over the years of merging, trying to want to buy you guys? And if so, why have you said no?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty common. Phone calls, emails, whatever it might be. I'm usually pretty resistant, but there have been a few that have managed to track me down over phone and be like, well, let's just have a conversation. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really interested. And they're like, well, just listen to what I have to say. And I'm like, okay, like, we talk for 30 minutes or so. Well, if you ever change your mind, I'm like, yeah, for sure. I think being independent is important, because the reason that I started the business was because I wanted complete control of my time. And that has never changed. And I don't really see there being a downside to us not having like a ton of capital to invest. I always talk about the 3 C's in terms of business leadership, or really any leadership. And that's character, competency, and capacity. And, starting 2025, I have to look over, a $5 million budget. I have to be mindful of these 30 humans that are on staff and work with us, and their mortgages and their bills that they have to pay. Like, if that was where I was 10 years ago, we would have been in a drastically dangerous situation, because I did not have the character, capacity, or competency to handle that. But what I've been really grateful for over the history of our company is that everything has grown very gradually. And so I've been able to scale each of those 3 C's at each stage as we grow. And so I'm not really looking to get an influx of, 25 million cash or, 5 million cash or whatever it might be. One, because now I have to give up control of the company in a certain respect, which is not the original reason. I started the company for the exact opposite reason of that. So philosophically, it wouldn't align with what I want. And then secondly, what if suddenly now I'm managing 50 people instead of 30 or 75 or 125, and we're doing like different ad campaigns that I don't have experience with, and now suddenly I'm actually not even using that money as well as I could. It's being spent frivolously and it's being wasted. And then 5 years down the line, we haven't achieved what we wanted and we don't have control of the company in the same way. Suddenly, the board of directors is saying, hey, you weren't profitable in this way. We're going to have to pull this lever and pull this lever. Oh, no, philosophically, we don't want to do that. Well, hey, you don't have ultimate decision-making power anymore. So,
yeah. Speaking of funding, I mean, you guys, you're outside of Toronto, Niagara area?
Yeah, the Canadian office, Niagara Falls.
So I want to talk about this, United States office here in a second, but you started in Canada, primarily headquarters in Canada. I'm guessing a lot of your clients, churches are in the United States. What's that like, the conversion? Is it frustrating? Is it hard to be international in that sense for you guys?
I mean, sometimes it makes travel slightly difficult. We can't just get on a plane and travel to a church and do things because we're 100% online. There's no problem with a church from another country buying our software. There are tax implications, but it's not like I go to the airport and they say, "Why are you coming to America?" And I say, "To work." And they say, "Where's your visa?" And I say, "What?" My friend Jake, who runs Churchfront, he does a lot of work in churches where he'll go to the church and they'll redo their auditorium with new sound and new lighting. And it's that would be difficult if we wanted to get into that. Not a challenge that's insurmountable, but it would have its challenges. Because we're completely online, those have been pretty minimal, I would say.
Yeah. Speaking of completely online, I'm curious, how you said you have a United States office now. You guys started in Canada. The kind of the COVID, the work from home thing, what is it like for you and your employees? Do you guys go in the office a lot? Is it kind of a 50-50 hybrid thing? What does it look like?
Yeah, so we're in the office 3 days a week. So Mondays and Fridays are at home. So hybrid. Before COVID, we were fully in the office. And then me personally, I'm really only in the office on Wednesdays unless we have a big film shoot or something irregular is happening during the week. The office is 6 minutes from my house, so it's not especially far. And all of our employees live in the Niagara region, so they're not too far from the office themselves.
How did you come to the kind of the 2 days from home, 3 days from in the office schedule?
That was really just an organic thing coming out of COVID, where we had all kind of gotten a taste for the hybrid work week. And also, that also coincided, at least with our in-person team in Niagara, with everyone having babies. And so before, I was the only one with kids. Like I have a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old, both daughters. And then every other kid in our office is like 3 or under. And there's like 9 of them now. So like everyone had kids. And that before no one had kids. And so it was just kind of the perfect moment to, okay, let's make this hybrid.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is it like for you now? I mean, I know there's probably a lot of hustle in the beginning trying to get this thing off the ground. Now you got profitable business, 30 employees. How do you schedule like your time? How do you kind of ensure like you're not doing this thing all the time? What rhythms have you fallen into?
Yeah, so I would say my most important work is my creative work. So I do that in the morning, and that is kind of like the best work that I do. I still do all of the writing for all of our content ourselves. And then we just have really intelligent and experienced personnel in charge of like all the main departments in the company. So like I don't oversee engineer development on the software side. I don't oversee product design. And then even on like our customer support initiatives, like one of the big campaigns we announced last year was we were going to give 1,000 church websites free makeovers. So like I built that campaign and I sketched it out and I was like the visionary behind the idea. But then when it came to implementing it, we have a team of leads that actually go and do that. And so for me, I try my best to protect my time because that was the reason I started the company in the first place. But also only do what I excel at, what I enjoy doing, and what really pushes the needle forward for the company. And so there are even like things like I'm pretty, as of this year, aggressive with like my notifications that come through my phone. Like unless you are, a specific person, you're probably not going to be able to get through me because I was just like attached to my phone. Every single notification that came, every single query from an employee, like I want to be able to help. I want to be able to assist. And then I'm realizing like, oh, I'm just like glued to this thing and that's not healthy. So like it's every year trying to basically look at your values and then take inventory of your day-to-day life and the day-to-day of the business and ask yourself, okay, in the last year, like where have we drifted from these values? Because with every step and stage of growth, you're compromising certain things to meet other objectives. And so we have this like codified set of values at our company. I have codified values for myself and my family. And every year you kind of take a look at those and realize, have we drifted? And if we have, what do we need to do to return to these values? Because at the end of the day, those are the ultimate objectives that we've decided that we want to live by, not necessarily like profit or whatever it might be. And so just, using that as the ultimate measuring stick for yourself and the company is really important.
Yeah. We hit on this. I'm going somewhere with this in a second just to kind of maybe codify. Everything that Pro Church does, or you guys are involved in. So you do church websites. You guys got a podcast, YouTube channel. You do the sermon socials where you take like clips, that sort of thing. Like, what's all of the things that Pro Church Tools like currently offers or does, if that's kind of answerable?
Yeah. So the product side is, like you said, Nucleus, church website builder. Social Sermons, that's the social media agency. So like Social Sermons is like the high cost productized service. And you only work with like 150 churches. Whereas Nucleus is the considerably lower cost software platform that has like no cap on the number of churches that could host their websites on the platform. And then, depending on when this episode comes out, we're also launching a certificate program in 2025 called Pro Church Certified. And that is a 12-month training certificate program that's basically meant to help train churches on everything that I've learned in the last 10 years. Like every time I sit down to write these modules, it's broken up into 9 modules. I ask myself like, okay, Brady in 2010, he's a media director as an intern at a church plant. Like what does he need to know about this specific creative discipline? And so each of the 9 modules is the 9 creative disciplines that, every ministry has to tackle. And so that's really meant to like resource churches. And then there are a couple of optional upgrades within that program where we'll do audits of your accounts, audits of your website. We'll actually like redesign your website, your logo, and your branding. So that's exciting new that we're launching in 2025, kind of venturing into a vertical of product that we haven't been in like close to a decade.
Yeah. Of all the things that either the company does or that you're personally involved in, like what would you say is your favorite?
Ooh. I don't think I have one because they all complement each other really nicely. To get into specifics, social sermons, the high cost agency model is really nice because you don't need too many churches in it to be profitable. The downside is it's a high churn product because it's an optional thing for a church. If they're like, look at this high cost line item in our budget, do we need this? No, like we think it's working, we love it, but like if we had to cut it, it'd be one of the first things to cut.
Yeah.
So that's like the upside and downside of that model. And then software is great because once you have a website, like you can't cancel your website. You can move platforms, but that's not an easy thing to do, which is why we launched that makeover program last year, because like it's hard to gain new customers because it's like such a hassle to change your website. Right. So okay, let us do it for you. So that product has tremendously low churn, but you need thousands of customers to make it profitable because software is a beast and the cost of software is low. Each of those weaknesses complements the strength of the other and vice versa. And so that's really nice. And then certified, which is kind of the training model, what that does is it capitalizes on the reputation that we've built with churches over the past decade. Like I resisted it for a long time, but I just get so many emails from churches saying like, we don't want you to do it for us. We need you to like train us in depth. And the reality is that as much as I try to do that on platforms like YouTube and social, we can never go too deep on those platforms because not enough people will watch those videos. Yeah. So it's just not like smart of me to make a video that's that in depth because not many people will watch it. And then it won't actually serve the audience that is there. There's a very small subset that will. And so we kind of have to like siphon that off into its own place. So I really like all those things. And I think the diversity is part of what makes it fun for me. Just having that variety.
Yeah. Speaking of the content, YouTube channel, the podcast, what's it like to come up with the content, each week for each episode? It's kind of like week to week. How do you figure out what you guys are going to talk about?
Yeah, so that's definitely like 100% on me. I have a to-do list at the beginning of each week. And so I'll sit down and it's basically like what I'm learning, what we're practicing in actual churches and like the results and or observations that we're seeing in the actual field. And then we want to bring those to churches. A lot of the time, I think my greatest strength in terms of writing is taking complicated subjects and making them accessible to people, creating those aha moments where you feel like, oh, I can do this. This is something that I can implement in my church. One of the recent ones we did was we went to my church and we basically showed how we created this stage design from these donated gutters from people in our church. And we walked through like the exact cost, the exact blueprint, where to get all the materials from. And then a week later, I got a DM from a church and it was a photo of them like constructing it. And then a week later, they showed me like, it looked like a carbon copy of what our church had on their stage. And like, those are the things that like reward you and make you feel like really excited because you see some church implementing exactly what you shared.
Yeah. So I know there's some uniqueness to this, like, if you're doing like the sermon stuff, obviously you have to have sermons to edit, but a lot of the kind of the programs you offer, websites, the digital stuff, like it's not just church or ministry specific. So I'm curious why, have you had like other nonprofit, other businesses say, hey, can you help us with this? And if so, why are you keeping focus just on the church space?
Yeah, we certainly have like Christian nonprofits use a platform like Nucleus now and again. I'll always try to tell them like, hey, the greatest strength of Nucleus is its church-specific features. So although you align philosophically with the church in terms of like mission perhaps, the specific features that Nucleus has that a Squarespace does not, that a Wix does not, that a WordPress and Weebly do not, they may not be especially useful for you. They may, but they may not. In terms of why I only focus on churches, there have been a couple of times where I've been like, oh, let's expand the business to the greater, world audience. And then every time, like I've just lost interest. I've lost passion. So, depending on your specific theological bent, maybe that's calling, maybe that's like the grace that I have, or like even the limitation. Like the thing about calling, I believe, or grace or whatever, your DNA is that like running in your lane requires boundaries and restrictions. Like people talk about this, metaphor of like running in your lane. It's like, oh wow, that's just your sweet spot. Your sweet spot also necessitates like other parts that you avoid. Like you don't step on that line. You don't leave your lane. And I think probably what accounts for the greatest degree for our success, especially like starting, as a 21-year-old, so pretty young, was that I found my lane earlier and I just haven't deviated from it. And so like it's just like long obedience in the same direction and the compounding returns. I have this quote on my wall in chalk. It says, you underestimate what you can do in 10 years, you overestimate what you can do in 1. And just like sticking to it, being consistent for 10 plus years. And what's really cool is the fact that when we started, the churches, the people that were reading our stuff and watching our stuff were like, young 20-somethings like me, just interns, volunteers, maybe youth pastors. Now they're like executive pastors and worship pastors, and they've been in the ministry for 10 years. And I'm really excited to like see where the next 10 years goes and the 10 years after that, because we're growing with this like generation of leaders, and we've been resourcing them and supporting them as best as we can from the beginning. And so again, as long as you take that goodwill and you nurture it and you protect it, and you don't take advantage of people, and you don't like cross the line, and you don't make mistakes when, like we all make mistakes, but like irreparable ones. It's just that compound growth over time that then looks tremendous when you see it from the outside.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the challenges, I think, specifically in the church space, is you've got a lot of different church traditions, theological bents, that sort of thing. How do you guys go about dealing with that? Are you kind of just like, hey, we're just Team Jesus? Is there anything that you guys would say, hey, we're not comfortable working with this? How do you guys, like, what's your guys' philosophy with that?
Yeah, we have, like, our value is, if you feel comfortable with the Apostles' Creed, we feel comfortable with you. And so we had a church that signed up for social sermons, and we kind of went through, just a light vetting process. And my team lead at social sermons came to me and said, I don't think this church like aligns with that. And because they were a universalist church, I believe, and on their website, like they said, like, we are not a creedal church. And it was very much like, we're just like people meeting together for the goodwill of the world. And so I wrote them and I said, like, hey, we kind of have this standard. We'd love to work with you. Does that feel like it fits your church? And they were honest. They're like, no, like, that's not what we are. And so we refunded their money. And, I think that was like $1,000 per month account. Like, it wasn't like small. But that's the standard that we have, and it's pretty rare that happens, but it does happen.
Yeah. Now, kind of on the other side, I know in the church world, people can be kind of nasty, harsh, mean for even some of the smallest things. How do you guys deal with criticism? I mean, especially in the online space, people probably say like, you don't need this. Why are we spending time with this? This is a waste of money. We just need community to be together. How do you deal with like the negativity and the criticism you guys get?
I mean, big part of it is just exposure therapy. So you experience it over and over again, and the same things get said, and it doesn't like affect you personally at that point. Another thing is like, we help churches with like technical and creative things. Like, we don't really delve into theology. Yeah. So it's very rare that like churches get too worked up about what we say. And what they do get worked up about, which becomes more and more rare as technology clearly becomes as pervasive as it is and as transformative as it can be, a church might say like, well, the early church didn't have this. And so then what we'll do is we'll try to like spin up a piece of content that like directly but thoughtfully addresses that criticism or concern. And usually it's those posts that end up being like our best performing, because every person that's serving in a church is tired of hearing that from like the 3 or 8 people that are always critical to them in their own ministry. And so what that does is it actually helps like provide language to people serving in churches to address those criticisms themselves. So usually, so long as it's not vulgar, we kind of have a line like, if you're vulgar, and that doesn't mean 4-letter words, it just means like, vulgarity, it when you see it, like we'll just delete that comment. But criticism and like different worldviews, in respect to the intersection of digital, creative, and ministry, love that. Usually that presents us with a great opportunity to respond and share our own values and perspective.
Yeah. Now, you said you're coming up on 11 years this year. You've probably seen some things that have gone well, things that have not gone well. Is there like a 1 or 2 maybe decisions that you made that you regret, that you wish you could go over again? You look back now and you're like, man, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah, I would say we stopped publishing the podcast during COVID. And like, I really think if I could do that over again, I wouldn't have stopped. I think like we lost a lot of momentum on the podcast front that then took a very long time to recover. Mm-hmm. And so I think like one of my just foundational beliefs about content is no weeks off. And the only time I've ever neglected that was the podcast during COVID. And that's because it was in person and we filmed in person and we didn't want to do it remotely. But in retrospect, I think I would have just found a way to do it remotely and been like, yeah, this is how it is, rather than pausing.
Yeah. I'm curious, the the thought behind this too. I know like you have pro church tools, and then you have the Brady Shearer, and like the Instagram, a lot of stuff is kind of Brady Shearer, but pro church tools is under it. What's the philosophy behind the individual focus as opposed to the company focus on some of these social accounts?
Yeah, like Pro Church Tools is the worst company name of all time. I named it on a whim because the best man in my wedding was like, you should start a blog. You're learning so much about like cameras. Here are 17 ideas of just random words mixed with like church and tools and like pro and design and logo. And I was like, Pro Church Tools, that domain's available, buy it. So like we put a lot more thought into Nucleus and social sermons than we did Pro Church Tools. And so, like, if you go to the website, you'll see Pro Church Tools with Brady Shearer. And over the years, there have been a number of different permutations on, like, the social accounts. The Facebook page said for the longest time, Pro Church Tools with Brady Shearer. And eventually, we were just like, you know what? Social is meant to be person to person, and it is dramatic, the difference between accounts where you are interacting with a brand versus accounts where you are interacting with a person. And so we were like, okay, it's just Brady Shearer as all, like, the accounts. And so that was kind of the direction that we took.
So kind of a weird question because, I mean, it's what we see, like institutions, companies, whatever, they're following, their engagement is whatever. And then individuals, it is so much higher. When it comes to churches, it's like, you got to do the church. You can't, it would be weird to be like, New City Church where I leave, New City Church with Dylan Dotson. At least I would feel weird with it. So I don't know what the question is here. If somebody's a church leader or just business leaders listen to this, it's like, well, I have this organization. How do I know if I should focus on me as the leader or the organization, especially specifically for churches?
So that really comes down to like if the leader is comfortable themselves. I think that, like I just said, you can expect better performance if the leader is having their own account compared to the church account. If the leader did have their own account, you would want that to be a value of theirs. And you would want then to have both accounts. And you would probably have some crossover with collab posts. You would experiment with that and see how they're performing. We see with collab posts, like sometimes they work great. Other times they actually like decrease your overall reach, which is pretty paradoxical. You'd think like one audience plus one audience equals more audience. And that's not always the case with collab posts. We always recommend churches try things over a 90-day period, then reevaluate. You kind of need about 90 days to get significant, substantial sample size to evaluate these types of changes. So if a church is not comfortable with a pastor kind of being like their own lead account, which is perfectly understandable, you still want to pursue congruency between your in-person experience and online. This is a principle that we hammer all the time, congruency. So if you think about your in-person service, what is the largest portion of that? Probably pastor on stage preaching. Thus, the principle of congruency, your social accounts should be the same. What we often see are churches that are like, well, we don't want our pastor to be like the face of social. I'm like, well, he's the face of in-person, so why would he not be the face of social? At the very least, we need to like deal with that specific issue before we decide to go in a different direction. Because in-person should always inform online. Online is not like the preeminent thing of church. It's what leads people to church, but in-person is what matters most. So in-person informs online. So congruency from in-person to online. And so the nice thing about this is that coming out of COVID, virtually every church has sermon recordings in the video. So what we can do is we can simply repurpose, repackage those. It's a tremendous advantage that churches have that virtually no other industry has. Senior leaders creating content every single week in the form of video. Like if you're a real estate agent, dentist, lawyer, you got to do all that stuff and then be like, online as well. Whereas churches, we already have the content ready for repurposing, repackaging. Yeah. You can publish 2 sermon reels a week. And now the pastor is still front and center on the social pages, which matters because humans connect with humans.
If a church is like, hey, we get like the personal is always going to be, the individual is always going to be more relatable, that sort of thing, and they're like good with, doing more stuff with the pastor. Let's say they've got, I'll use New City example. Give some coaching. Like, how would you go about this? We do the sermon clip sort of thing. We do this thing called Bible in a Minute, where it's me explaining Bible verse in a minute every single week, and it's like, okay, so you post that on the church's stuff. Are you saying you kind of collab with the individual pastor, or like, would you just post it on the pastor's and not the church's social, YouTube? Like, what would you go, like if they've got this content and the lead pastors or whoever's like front and center for it, how do you, if they're good for it, how do you kind of tie the two accounts together, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so there's some content that kind of hits the intersection of both, and that really comes down to like, what are we trying to gain from here? If you're perfectly fine on the philosophy side and you're like, I'm comfortable having my own personal account and the church account, then it comes down to, okay, our objective should be the broadest reach possible. So what we would want to do is, over the course of several months, experiment with exclusively publishing reels to your account only, and then exclusively publishing reels to the church account only, and then doing collab posts only. And then look at those 3 90-day sample sizes and basically identify like what is the best approach going forward. And then we would like stick to that. And then we would use other content as needed on the church page and on your personal page. So on the personal page, let's say, and you could even split it. If you wanted to just make this clean and not even do the testing, like I don't want to spend like 3 months on this, or not 3 months, it's 90 days. I don't want to spend 9 months on this. Fair enough. Take 2 sermon reels per week. That's kind of our recommended per sermon. 1 goes to the church account, 1 goes to your personal account. Then your personal account, I would say maybe also has that 1-minute Bible minute. And then maybe, every week or 2, it's got a personal photo. You and the family, you doing something you like, fishing, whatever it might be, and so that's like personal. And then on the church side, we've got 1 sermon reel, and then maybe we throw in a carousel post that we also create from the sermon itself. That's pulled from the sermon, but it's kind of like faceless in nature because it's designed first. And then we throw in like, let's say what we call portrait posts, which are really just photos of church life, church community, emphasis on the people in your church. So now we've got a sermon from you, a carousel slide, which is inspired by the sermon that you've written, so you don't need to have someone rewrite something else. And then you have 2 photo posts, carousels, still photos of the people in your church. And so now both are kind of like aligned correctly with what they should be. Yours is more personal. The church has your face, as it should, because a church service would, but it also has the life of the church, as it should as well.
Interesting. Is there churches that you recommend that you think they're doing this really well that other churches could look at and kind of maybe emulate or learn from?
Well, the challenge with that is that you often, there are 2 types of churches that do social really well. There are mega churches, and they do social really well because of the influential personality that's on stage. And usually that's the catalyst. This is also true with celebrities. If you go and look at a celebrity's social account, never follow anything they do. They do nothing you should do as a normal person on social because they don't have to. Like, they can just, Zendaya can just like post whatever she wants, like 8 million likes. It's like, okay, like that doesn't mean you would get really great response if you did that. So mega churches are kind of the same, and they can kind of just like skirt by on the back of like the influential pastor. But they, indisputably have great numbers. The other churches that do it really well are the ones that have like a team dedicated to extremely creative things. So like Life Church Memphis is a great example of this. They're not the type of church that's like, it's Furtick, it's Grishel, it's, whomever that's up there. But they have like a couple of individuals who are extremely creative and spend all of their time like doing extremely, I keep using the word extremely, but like it's a lot of animation and great camera work and design and post-production and sound design. And as much as I love spotlighting those churches, and I said last year, like this might be like my favorite church on social right now, it's almost never translatable to the average church.
Yeah.
And so the average church, we recommend start with that sermon content because you all have it, and then repurpose it into 2 sermon reels, a carousel, and a quote. Those are 4 posts. And then you want to supplement that with 2 more posts that are going to be portrait focused. So carousel, few photos of the church, a singular photo post from church life. And now you've got like 6 posts a week. That's kind of the upper echelon of what you want to reach to. Again, no weeks off is the mandate. So if you can only publish 2 reels per week, 1 reel per week and a photo, great. As long as you're like more than 2 per week, that's great.
Yeah. I know social, kind of the rules of engagement have changed so much over the years. I feel like, years ago it was like, you don't want to post the same thing in multiple accounts. Everybody sees it. There's no point in them following you. Now, like nobody sees anything. So let's say you got these sermon clips, these whatever. Are you saying, hey, is there a link that you should shoot for? And are you saying, hey, post them everywhere, or just, what would your philosophy be?
Sorry, is regarding like post specifically?
Like on all the social accounts. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Do you post them everywhere? Do you just post them sometime? And then do you have like a recommended link for like the videos and that sort of thing you should shoot for?
Yeah. So 4 major platforms right now: TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. TikTok in limbo. We're recording this like the week of the Supreme Court debate. Sorry to timestamp this episode in real time.
That's great.
So like in the States, at least, TikTok, tremendously influential, a little bit in limbo. But those are the 4 major platforms. X is kind of its own thing. Very few churches excel on X. If you have a pastor that loves that platform, there are some churches there's some pastors that do well there. Churches, it's just, I've never seen really any church do well on that platform, so I don't normally include it. The nice thing about all these platforms is that in the previous era of social, they were marked by feature specialty. So Instagram was for photos, and Facebook was for life updates, and Snapchat was these disappearing stories, and then Twitter was live feed of the world. Nowadays, they all have feature parity, so you can publish virtually any piece of content across all of them. So now, if all of them are allowing the same types of content, what makes them different? Well, what makes them different are the demographics on each platform. So TikTok is Gen Z, and Instagram is millennials, and Facebook is boomers, and YouTube is the only platform where every single generation is on there, including Gen Alpha. And Gen Alpha, which is the generation coming after Gen Z, is on there because they're not allowed social, but they are on YouTube Shorts because they're allowed YouTube. And so I'm very interested to see how that shapes the landscape of social going forward. If you have this new generation that's like, yeah, we're a YouTube first generation. Very interested to see what that might mean. Yeah. We're not there yet. In terms of your question, I always say, if you've got a sermon reel, publish it to Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok. We can never predict which platform a church is going to excel on the most. And so this is where you really do want to publish all of them for 90 days and then see what's up. We had a church that came to us, working with us at Social Sermons, and they said, we've been around for 40 years. We just want people to know our church exists in this area. And I said, okay, cool. They're like, should we have a TikTok account? I'm like, yeah, set it up. Within the first month, 2 families had come from TikTok. I could never have predicted that. Yeah. And it's not always like that. There's just no way of knowing. And so you want to publish to all of them and then see where your content is resonating. Because at the end of the day, we're looking for the intersection of faith and culture. Your church and its own DNA is offering the world something that no other church is. And sometimes what I love about social is its ability to give us feedback and insight into where those intersections exist. We always say, repeat the best, forget the rest, continue to test. The more you publish content, and this gets to what I was saying about our own content, when I would take criticisms and I would turn those into actual posts, I realized that archetype resonated with people more than sometimes our training stuff. It was like when I put my foot in the ground and I said, this is what we believe. I said, okay, that's an archetype where based on people's attention and engagement and their views, they've said to me, because they voted with not just what they said, oh, great post, Brady. No, they voted with their attention. This is what we care about. So that was invaluable insight to me because I just discovered, okay, that's a repeat the best category of posts that we can continue to pull from. As a church example, there was a church in Texas, one church, and they had a husband and wife preaching team, and they found that anytime their sermon clips related to parenting, they just outperformed by huge margins. And so what they did was they just doubled down on that, repeat the best. And they grew hundreds and hundreds of thousands on TikTok and Instagram, and their church plant grew, from 0 to 1,000 in a few years. Not saying that's entirely on the back of those social posts, but it played a role. And so that's another amazing thing about social, almost using it as this market research tool where businesses would pay tens of thousands of dollars to get that. Social will give it to you for free.
Yeah. And I'm curious, got some questions about sermons. So you said an idea where 2 sermon clips a week. Why 2? Why not 1? Why not 3? I know there's probably context specific as well, but why 2?
Yeah, it is context specific. That comes from we process 150 church sermons every single week. And some churches say can we give 3 posts? And it's sometimes, but not predictably yes. Whereas for all types of churches, high church, low church, charismatic church, evangelical church, church plant, non-denom, we're confident if your sermon is based in scripture, we can pull 2 clips. Yeah.
Okay. This one's a little bit in the weeds for those that not are in church space, but I'm curious. Uploading sermons. So you can upload it. So churches will use YouTube and put the YouTube in their website or Vimeo, or some websites, they'll be embedded, Subsplash, Website Builder, you'll embed your sermon in the actual website itself and not necessarily YouTube, Vimeo. If I'm a church, I've got a sermon. Where should all my sermons live and be hosted? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I still prefer YouTube for this. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. It's owned by the largest search engine in the world, Google. And so it's one of the few platforms where discovery is still very strong. We have 2 YouTube channels for our company. There's one with 150,000 subscribers. It grew by 10% last year. And then we started a new podcast-specific channel. So it grew 5x last year because it went from 1,000 to 5,000 subscribers. On Instagram, we had 90,000 followers last year, ended the year with 130. So that grew about 48%. Those are the 2 platforms where discovery is the strongest. And so what we care about with sermons is making them accessible to the people in our church, And ideally, it's at a low cost. YouTube, check and check. And then 2, we want ideally people to discover our sermons and potentially discover our church. If nothing less, people are searching for answers to the world's greatest questions. Who should be providing those answers? Churches. And so I still think YouTube is my preferred platform for that.
Yeah. And one of my pet peeves, you're the expert here, is you tell me this is right or wrong. I'm telling like pastors, planners all the time. I'm like, guys, nobody, if you do a live stream, that sort of thing, after the live stream is over, nobody wants to watch anything but the sermon. And so you'll have churches, what kind of like doesn't make sense to me, especially like larger mega churches. I'm like, you guys should know better. Like you have the people, the resources, and they'll put like as their sermon, like the entire 70-minute, 80-minute service, instead of just like putting the sermon on the website. Why do churches do that? And churches that are doing that, like, is that a good strategy or not?
Well, it depends what else you're doing with your sermon, because I'm with you. Very few churches, the worship is going to sound listenable on a video. And the nice thing about YouTube is even after you live stream through it, you can trim it after the fact. So maybe churches just don't know that they can trim it after the fact. And like after it's been live, just only keep the full sermon. What we also recommend churches do, though, is if they have the bandwidth, and this is where, we do this for churches every single week, is if you want to see an example of this, both Life Church and Elevation do this. So let's say you have a full sermon or the full service, and the name of that service is, pithy sermon, series title, date, and then pastor's name. Well, presumably that sermon is full of wisdom that people care about, irrespective of their faith background. But that title is never going to allow them to discover that. So we were inspired by podcasting culture to say, like, okay, we have this, hour-long conversation between you and I. I'm going to talk about one specific subject in one of the questions that you could pull. And maybe it's in a sermon, maybe it's an 8 to 15 minute segment. And we take that part. So for example, we had a church doing a kind of typical 3-part sermon. First part was all about Judas and Jesus. So we pulled that part. It was like 12 minutes. We retitled it, How to Handle Betrayal. We created a custom thumbnail, followed all the best practices, and now there's a video that when people are looking for, betrayal, there's a chance that gets indexed in search, and now it's the wisdom of Scripture meeting the needs of those people and in the process discovering our church. So if you're going to take that approach, you could keep the full service in the live tab on YouTube and then publish these, mini sermons in the actual video feed, and then they're separate on 2 different tabs. Right. And the live feed you don't get taken to automatically. You'd land on the videos feed. And so it's like the live feed only becomes for the people in your church or the real sickos that really want to see a full thing. Right. So that's an extra step. The easier step, if you're not ready to go all the way in with that, is to just trim it. And I'm with you there.
Yeah. Because even if you don't even do the extra step of all like the sermon kind of chunks, you could still leave the live stream up, is what we do. And then we take the sermon recorded and just also upload the sermon itself as its own video, not on the live on there.
Yeah, precisely.
So one of the things that I guess frustrates me a little bit, spend a lot of time with churches, church planners, is there's a cost to some of this online. I like to call it online engagement, and there's like a resistance to it. And it's like, maybe you could just speak through like the importance of budget, trying to reach people, why this is no longer kind of a secondary thing, but it should be a primary thing if you're trying to reach people in your community. Can we talk through like, this has a cost, website has a cost, has a staffing cost, whether it's something exported through you guys doing sermon clips or someone on staff doing sermon clips. Maybe talk through like the necessity of it, and maybe like, I don't know, what's your opinion on percentage of a budget that might be should be going towards these things?
Percentage of a budget. Can't say I have even a rough guide on that for a church. I try to tie everything back to mission. So I'm not going to talk to a church and say like digital matters because like I think it does, or digital matters necessarily because these are the stats on it. So like, what is the mission of your church? Okay, so our mission is to, equip people and reach people with the gospel. Say, okay, great. Reach people with the gospel. I am convinced, and I can provide now the evidence to you, that the absolute best and most efficient way to do that is via the internet. It is the singular greatest tool in the history of humankind. That's why I say the biggest communication shift in 500 years. That's in reference to the printing press, where suddenly every human can have their own Bible. And what did that lead to? Well, people started reading the Bible and said, wait a minute, the church is saying different things than what this Bible says. And thus kicked off, in part, the Protestant Reformation. And we're living through another transformative period in human history, where we have the ability to take any message and then share it with the whole world. 2/3 of the world's population is on social media. 2/3. And they basically let you set up shop And these platforms, unlike in the previous era of social where you could really only reach people that chose to follow you, now they're like, want to reach the world? Just make something good. Okay, great. Like, I help churches with social media and websites and communications, and I have 150,000 followers on like Instagram and and YouTube. Like, that's an obscene number of people. But that's how big the world is. And the church has the ability to take this message and the mandate within Scripture, that's the Great Commission, and surely is, a crucial part of virtually every church's mission statement and their mission and reason for existence. And they can express that and see that mission realized via these tools. Yeah. So then it comes down to like, okay, how much do you want to actually like invest in it and spend in it? That's totally your call. But churches for a long time have been spending on things like billboards and mailers and radio ads and TV ads. I know because when I was, at that church plant in 2010, we did all those things. And I can show you and prove to you that they will not return the same as, the internet. So it's really just as simple as that. Anytime I'm trying to convince any pastor or church of anything, it's like, what's your mission? Okay, here's how I believe we can fulfill that mission. And then if we're going to decide on something else, it really just comes down to the burden of proof of how they can prove how a different thing will better fulfill that mission.
Speaking of reach, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You just mentioned the YouTube channel numbers, Instagram. I'm sure like 11 years ago when you started this thing, it would have blown your mind that this many people would be following you for this type of content. So, YouTube, Pro Church Tools with Brady Shearer. You said you guys started a second one for the podcast. So you lost all that audience starting over in some sense, at least the subscribers. Why the second YouTube channel?
Yeah, I was pretty resistant to that for a long time. YouTube kind of changed in the past 5 years where multiple channels became pretty normal. Before it was kind of rare. So it was kind of just like it became best practice. And the reason is like people subscribe. I really believe in honoring the implicit relationship you have with a person when they choose to follow or subscribe. And I know that I care about this because I haven't always done my best in this way. So someone follows my YouTube channel. Like, they came from a certain video and they're expecting future videos to be like that video. And if suddenly I start serving them dramatically different videos, it might be like, well, I thought I came for this and now you're giving me this. And so just having a second channel where the videos are a very different pace, it's me and a co-host, it's a different cadence, it's a different publishing schedule, it's a different publishing day. Like, okay, they're always going to be like that. And our YouTube videos are always going to be like this. At the end of the day, I might send out both to our email list, and that way you can experience and check out both. And ideally, you are subscribed to both. But the other thing about YouTube as well is that subscribers only mean so much. It's the same thing. The upside of these discovery algorithms is that any account can reach any number of people. The downside is you're not guaranteed the same distribution that maybe you were in previous eras. But that only really matters if you're a massive account, which very few churches are. So I think it's an upside overall for churches.
Yeah. One of the questions I want to ask, although I feel like I know the answer, at this season of life, it seems like there's really nothing else you'd rather do. Like you're kind of all in on Pro Church Tools, you're doing the same sort of thing. You're also a big sports fan. If someone like the Toronto Raptors, let's say, said, "Hey Brady, we've seen your stuff. We want to bring you in for exposition," like what would your response be?
I mean, I think I like having control of my time, and I like being at home with my family. And I can't imagine like going to the Toronto Raptors and engaging with that type of change of pace in life would probably not align with my goals. If the Raptors said, "Yeah, we're going to pay you your fee to come in for a day and like provide your insights," happy to do that. I can't imagine that they would care to hear what I have to say.
That's funny. I do want to talk to you about your sports fandom here for a second. You're a big Raptors fan. It's the only professional basketball team in Canada. What was it like for you when they won a couple years ago?
Yeah, I would be underselling it to say that it was a life transformative moment. And it's allowed me to enjoy sports fandom, I would say, in a much healthier way in the now 6 years since they won. Because I used to just really live and die with my sports team. So Raptors first, and then Blue Jays and Niners in football are kind of like my, second tier sports loves. And I love them both very much as well. But I grew up with my dad watching basketball. So the Raptors became a franchise in 1995. I was 4 years old, and we would go to games every single year, and everything was sports growing up. I played, at a high level as long as I could until, I was permanently 5'8". And so, like, yeah, I went to Game 5, and I think it cost $10,000 to get in the building for Game 5 in Toronto when they were up 3-1 and had the chance to secure the championship. So, like, I was like, sorry, honey, like, our life savings are being spent on this game. And they lost. And they lost after, like, looking like they were going to win. And I remember just being, like, devastated. And then for Game 7, we were flying to Scotland for a filming trip. So I wasn't going to know what happened if it made it to a Game 7. And so I was, like, staring down the barrel of, like, what's going to happen is I'm going to get on this plane and I'm going to land and figure out, did the Raptors lose to the Warriors and, like, lose a 3-1 lead after the Warriors so famously lost their own 3-1 lead against LeBron? Or am I going to land and then they'll have won and I will have missed it? Luckily, they won in Game 6, and that is a what-if that we'll never have to, consider. But yes, huge sports fan. Now that they've won a title, it's like, oh yeah, I got to experience a title. Yeah. Oh, the Niners suck, the Raptors suck, the Blue Jays suck. Hey, one time they didn't, so I'm happy.
Now, as a Canadian, you didn't mention hockey.
Yeah, so I grew up in an anti-hockey household. Hockey was such a big part of small-town Canada specifically, like just shoved down your throat to the point where when I would watch SportsCenter in the morning, the Canadian version of SportsCenter, not on ESPN, but on our TSN, you would watch 25 minutes of highlights in a 30-minute show waiting to learn if the Raptors won the night before because I couldn't stay up for every game. I'm watching like, oh, Columbus beat Minnesota in a hockey game. It's like, okay, like, we don't live near those places. Can you please just show me the team that lives in our country and plays here? So like, you just resent this sport because it just the shroud that it had over the entire culture. Now, interestingly, like that has changed dramatically in the past 20 years, and hockey is still big, like in the more rural areas, but like in the more urban areas, like I think like you could make the argument that basketball has like a stronger presence and baseball is huge. And so just because Canada is such an international place, and that's become even more so in the past couple decades, so that doesn't matter as much anymore. And also, I don't have to sit and watch TSN because I can tailor my sports feed however I want. And so I don't even know what's happening with hockey.
Yeah. I was going to say, the Raptors had success. The Blue Jays have had some fun recent couple of years. I know from what I know, the Toronto Maple Leafs, they haven't won like a playoff series in like 20 years, so that probably doesn't help. I'm curious, your love for the San Francisco 49ers, how does that come about?
Yeah, so Bible college for me was on the West Coast. Okay. And I didn't grow up like a fan of any NFL team. I just grew up a fan of the NFL. And I remember like I was 21 and I was like, okay, it's about time to choose a team. And I was on the West Coast. And so I said, okay, I'm going to choose the Seahawks or I'm going to choose the Niners. And I remember just like on a whim being like, okay, the 49ers. I didn't know anything about their history. I didn't know really anything about like their team or their like past or their future. And like come to find out like, oh, wow, like this is a very storied franchise. They've won 5 championships. And then ever since I started cheering for them, they've been to the Super Bowl thrice and lost all 3 times. So I think I might be the problem there. And, at least if I'd chosen the dreaded Seahawks, who of course the Niners have had a, storied rivalry with, maybe I would have seen a title with, the man of faith, Russell Wilson himself. But alas, you choose a team, you ride with them.
Yeah. Now I'm curious. I know your industry is a little bit different than sports and TV, about that there is some, overlaps in terms of technology, that sort of thing. As a sports fan, do you ever find yourself watching a broadcast or whatever and critiquing, I don't know, like camera angles, audio, stuff like the average person would have no idea about?
Oh, definitely not. Like live production is another part of like ministry that I have like experience in and I help churches with, but like it's not like my strongest skill. We always talk about the 167 hours beyond church service every single week. That's kind of like our biggest emphasis. And so I don't even know enough about live production and like directing to like see sports and like how those things happen. Where I tend to like really get hung up on is like just language. So like because I write first and foremost, like just the words people use and how they talk. I think broadcasting is like such a challenging discipline, and I'm always very impressed. Aside from watching Tom Brady try to do commentary with the commentators and their jobs, because they do great.
Yeah, all the stuff you can bring it back to kind of your day-to-day job. All the stuff you're involved in, doing a lot of cool stuff. I know you love a lot of what you do. What would you say is maybe like the hardest thing about what you have to do for you?
The hardest thing is just like the weight and burden of all the people that are counting on you. And like you just want to come through for people and you want to like share this great life that you've built with them and you want to like raise them as much as you can. And so like, you just have to continue to do that. And the interpersonal stuff, like I would say that's the hardest part. It's also like the most rewarding part. So that's kind of like, the two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Speaking of all these people, again, when you started, I don't know that you probably thought 30 employees, 7-figure budget, that sort of thing. What are some of like the resources and things that you've used to kind of learn about leadership and to develop yourself in order to lead the team over the years?
Yeah, so like I'm pretty famously bad with like having mentors and having like that type of thing. I will always credit my mom, and I will always credit basically like our internal team. We just are all very close, and so like we talk a lot, and we're very open about like where things are headed and our needs. And so a lot of it just comes down to like making sure that I'm hearing all of them, that they all feel known and needed, and then they're taken care of, like, financially. And we try our very best to like overpay in terms of like what a competitive salary would be in an adjacent role. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it provides a lot of margin for when things go wrong or I make mistakes, because people aren't like coming to work in a place where like I can barely pay my bills. I'm working a second job. Like I'm not happy here because like things are tight at home. And really that just like affords us so much bandwidth for like, okay, this person's resenting this person is, dealing with this. That's like the secret, I guess, which is maybe not like so hidden of a secret, but it's really been a blessing for us.
Yeah. I'm curious too, speaking of Canada, you're from Canada. You spent some time in the States, Bible college. You went back to Canada. What do you love about Canada?
Well, I should be clear. My Bible college was also in Canada, but it was on the west coast of Canada. Okay. It was, in fact, not just Canada. It was the most northern major metropolis in North America. So, like, real Canada. What do I love about Canada? I love pretty much everything. There's nothing that I could really like say that I'm upset about, except for like we don't own an island. Like, I'd really just love to like own, and this is problematic, right? So just like put that aside. But like. There have been all these rumors since I was a kid, like, oh, Turks and Caicos in Canada. Maybe they're going to like, cozy up. Like, come on, like, let's do that. Because I would really just love to own real estate in my own country that is not like cold, but I can't. So that's really the only downside.
So speaking of the cold, I mean, I know the stereotype, but how true, I mean, is it cold like 9 months out of the year and you're like, hey, this is great?
Well, no, it is only cold where I live about 3 months of the year. Okay. We and most of Canada all live right next to the American border. So like if you look on a map and you see all of giant Canada, no one lives anywhere except along the line next to America. That being said, it does get cold. We get snow, but we get, where we live anyway, 4 full real seasons. And that's what I love about where we live. We get summer, spring, autumn, and winter. And they're all kind of equally 3 months-ish. And that's really nice because when I lived in Edmonton, where I was doing Bible college, that was like true 6 months of winter. And it was like, I just couldn't do that. I was not made for that.
Yeah. And they have a hockey team that you don't care about, so that doesn't help.
And I really tried, Dylan. I really did.
Yeah.
But that's just...
Yeah. Well, Brady, this has been awesome. I'm really grateful for your time. I'm kind of maybe just kind of curious to come from the extent you feel sharing, as you think about the Pro Church tools 5-10 years from now, do you have like dreams, desires, goals that's kind of like steer the path? Like, what are you hoping this thing looks like in 5-10 years?
Well, I hope to be doing it with the same people. The employees that we've had from day one are still with us. We've never had to fire anyone. We've had 2 people leave, one to follow their like dreams of working on big productions. And now they like, camera op on all these Netflix productions. So it's been great for them as far as I know. And then the other wanted to move to America. And so that was like, great. Like, if you're ready to move and like, build a new life, we support you in that. But otherwise, like everyone that's been with us is still with us. And I think the most rewarding thing is that relational longevity that I spoke about, like the interpersonal stuff can be tough, like working with your friends, but like, it's so much more fun than it is tough. Yeah. And so I want to like, just be doing it with the same people. Like one of the values is just like make great things with people you love. So that's the value. How it gets expressed today is probably going to be different than how it gets expressed in 10 years. But my hope is that that value is still, the big thing.
That's great. Well, Brady, again, thanks for the time. If people want to kind of connect with you, Pro Church Tools online, we'll put it all in the show notes, but where can people go?
Well, depending on what you like, if you're a podcast listener, if you're a YouTube viewer, if you like Instagram, you can just search my name and you'll find me there.
Awesome. Well, Brady, thanks for the time. It's been a really fascinating conversation. Thanking the kingdom. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for hosting me, Dylan.